The deranged and violent left is at it again. This time they're meddling in the Judge Kavanaugh nomination to the SCOTUS, by blackmailing Senator Collins, and threatening her with rape if she votes yes on Kavanaugh. And yet, the fake news mainstream media never reports this stuff. Instead, they say it's Trump and his supporters causing violence and dividing the nation. Breitbart Senator Susan Collins (RME) and her staffers are facing taunts and threats over Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, including a rape threat, reports The New York Times. Buried under no fewer than 10 paragraphs and the anodyne headline, "Interest Groups Turn Up Pressure on Senators Before Kavanaugh Vote," the far-left New York Times finally gets to the meat of the story with the news that Collins and her staffers are facing threats and vulgar language from the left-wing resistance, all of this in the hope of intimidating Collins to vote against Kavanaugh's confirmation. The left's frustration has boiled over at points, the Times understates. Annie Clark, a spokeswoman for Ms. Collins, provided The New York Times with copies of a letter and multiple voicemail messages addressed to the senator using vulgar language and outright threats. One example of a threat is a caller who told a 25-year-old female staff member at one of Ms. Collins's main offices that he hoped she would be raped and impregnated. Collins has also had some 3,000 coat hangers mailed to her office, a reference to the back alley abortion. Protesters have shown up at Collins' private home in Bangor. A group of men and women, some garbed in red robes and white bonnets, an allusion to The Handmaid's Tale, the Margaret Atwood book and television series, demonstrated outside the senator's home in Bangor over the weekend, The Times reports. According to Collins, she is also facing a form of blackmail from a left-wing activist who raised $1 million in a crowdfunding campaign. If Collins votes to confirm Kavanaugh, the activist is threatening to release the money to whoever challenges Collins in 2020. This quid pro quo fundraising campaign appears to be the equivalent of an attempt to bribe me, Collins said in an emailed statement to The Times. Attempts at bribery or extortion will not influence my vote at all. The Times did not report any similar behavior from anyone on the right who is hoping to affect Collins' final decision on Kavanaugh. This story is just one more example of the increase in violence and threats people on the political right have faced over the last couple of years. Unfortunately, as the left and their allies in the establishment media have amped up their hate rhetoric against Trump and his supporters over the last week, the violence has noticeably escalated. On top of this particular rape threat, a Trump event in D.C. was threatened with a mass shooting on the same day. The far-left Washington Post published Joe Scarborough's op-ed declaring Trump worse than the 9/11 terrorists. Last week, just hours after NBC's Chuck Todd compared Fox News to segregationists, a man intentionally plowed his car into a Fox studio in Dallas. Over the weekend, a GOP congressional candidate was attacked with a switchblade, a conservative columnist was forced into hiding over death and rape threats, and a GOP campaign office in Laramie, Wyoming, was hit with an arson attack. The establishment media have not only ignored or downplayed, as we see here, these harrowing stories, the establishment media have been every bit as irresponsible and inflammatory with its rhetoric as any extreme member of the resistance.